All right. Standing Still Podcast. My name is Steve Hoffa. Stoked that you're here. Glad that you're with me. Oh my goodness. This one's going to be good. I'm excited for this show. I'm in an upbeat mood. I'm going to speak it into existence. Look back on 2021. What a daunting task, huh? A guy to sit in a room by himself with a microphone and a camera. This is so 2021. And just tell me about your year. That is the assignment. That is the goal for this show. Kind of challenging. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be a liar is what I meant to say, I guess. I'm not going to be a liar. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a little bit terrified of this episode. Not terrified, but it's a little bit daunting. I mean, think about it. If I were to ask you, hey, man, just tell me the story of your entire year. Oh, and by the way, you do a pretty darn good job of kind of keeping everybody posted of all the crazy things that have happened to you, whether they be good or bad throughout the year. Now tell me it as a whole at the very end and make it original. That's what I'm going up against here. But I'm up to the task, and I'm really excited about it. I did one last year, and I think it was a lot of fun. It did pretty well numbers-wise, so I'm excited to do it again. It's kind of interesting, right? The whole new year, new me BS, but it's this episode as much as it is for you guys. I think it's even more for me, to be honest with you. Hey, go not only make the notes for what could be, 45 minutes, an hour TED Talk about your own year in review, but also just do it and speak it into existence. Have it on record. It's not an easy thing to do, but again, I'm up to the challenge, and I think it's going to be fun. I think I've had an interesting year, and I think people will want to hear it. And I think I've learned a lot. I know that. I don't think that. I know that I've learned a lot. I've tried to do my best to dwindle it down to I have 4 key lessons learned here, which I'll get into in just a second. But, yeah, I'm excited. All right. I know I say that a lot. I'm excited, but I really am. So I'm going to do my best to be as genuine, as vulnerable, and to keep the show moving, not ramble, as well as keeping it original like previously stated. So let's get into it. The kind of structure that I want to do for this show, I think the 2020, if I remember correctly, the way I structured it, I kind of was telling the story chronologically and kind of giving up lessons as the story kind of unfolded. This year, I think what I want to do, I'm going to give you those 4 lessons learned, the kind of peak things that, I've learned, obviously many more lessons than just 4 throughout the year, but I really want to touch on these specific ones. The reason being is I think they greatly impact kind of who I am. One specifically, and probably most of these, but definitely one. It's not something that I learned, completely new, but it really cemented itself as something that is very valuable. I am going to give you the meat before I even get into the kind of chronological story, which I split into chapters. But with that being said, let's get into it. And then, I'm going to give you the lessons learned. I'll tell you the story, and then I think we'll touch back on the lessons. And I definitely want to give you the lessons first because as you guys hear the story, you kind of have something in your head, right? You kind of preemptively kind of know the answer. So as you guys will hear, you guys can kind of concur why I came to those lessons learned. And you guys will kind of get a peek into my own head and kind of my own inner demons in the sense of it's always, I'll just give you the headline. It's always an inner battle, and it's a balance for me in my own head of whether or not I should be confident or depressed. It's kind of all or nothing with me a lot of the time. And as you guys will hear, I made a lot of headway and learned a lot of things in that region of my life. So, again, I'm rambling. Let's get into it. Lessons learned. Number 1, community that adds or multiplies is priceless. And I'm going to just burn through these really quick. What you do for a living should add a sense of value to your life. My resilience to and ability to rid of negativity has long time it been a weakness. It is now a strength. And number 4, which was a big one that I definitely learned this year, depression is not a broken bone. It is alcoholism. Okay. That's a lot to unpack, and we will. But let's start my story. I broke the story up into chapters, not by just kind of chronological time, but kind of ultimately, I think if I look at it, I didn't really mean to do it, but it kind of boils down to where I was at mentally during and throughout the year. So chapter 1, I've got it labeled as the high before the low. And it's pretty self-explanatory. This kind of went from January to mid-February. I came into 2021 on a very good footing, a very good note. I was extremely confident. I was really loving who I was, and I was really just on the ball. I felt like I was getting a lot done. I was doing well at work. I was doing well on the podcast. At least that's how I felt. I felt like I was just productive. I felt motivated. I liked who I was, and I felt like I was moving forward. And one key point that I wrote down in my notes here that I will touch on a lot, and kind of, like I said, that inner battle, those inner demons, is that it was easy for myself to convince myself that I should be confident. It was an easy sell, okay? That's how I felt. Now, let's move into chapter 2, because it's a very interesting moment in my life on itself, and it's kind of a brilliant setup for chapter 3. So, chapter 2, mid-February to March 13th specifically, which leads you to believe that the next chapter happened on a specific date, March 13th, which you would be right. So mid-February to March 13th, I have this labeled as just a hollow shell. What do I mean by that? Because that's exactly how I felt. I was extremely depressed. I would definitely concur that it wasn't the worst and the most depressed I've ever been in my life. That was probably when I was about 24. There was definitely a strong period in that zone of my life, that time period. And but I don't want to cut this one any slack. I was extremely depressed. I'll tell you exactly what I wrote. Depressed could see the many reasons why I should be confident, but I had no clue how to convince myself that they are genuine. And I remember saying that kind of topic back in that moment. I would be telling friends, and we'd be talking about how I was depressed, and I could see all the reasons on paper of why I should not be depressed and why I should be confident, why I truly am actually blessed. And in this moment in time, as I'm recording this, I genuinely do believe that. But I have all the reasons on paper, and yet I just can't seem to convince myself. And dude, that's literally the battle daily with me. Everybody kind of goes through highs and lows, but I'm always on guard, and I'm always like constantly checking all angles to play all the tricks to convince myself that I should be confident. Which is a weird world to be operating in. It's a weird frequency, I will say, and we'll get into that more. But it just, imagine I just was struggling at work in every avenue of my life. At work, I felt like I was really struggling, and I was. My attendance was horrible. I felt very unmotivated. The podcast was struggling because I felt like shit. So as a brand, which is very connected to who I was, it was very hard to sell the brand of the podcast of standing still and life is rad. It was extremely hard to do that and not feel like an absolute imposter when I was feeling like garbage. So everything began to crumble. I felt like I was not motivated, or I wasn't motivated. I felt like I just didn't know how to move forward, and I felt like my life was just wasting away. Chapter 3. A lot of you guys know this, especially if you listen to the show at all before. If you know me in any which way, you've heard about this. March 13th at about 5:45 p.m. on Painter Avenue in Uptown Whittier, California. An unexpected gift is what I have this chapter called. And I got in a huge motorcycle accident, huge crash. right? If you haven't already, check out episode 75, The Crash. It's one of my best yet, and I go into great detail about that accident. I'm going to do my best to kind of not go crazy into details because I know a lot of you have already heard them. But ultimately, I was in a huge motorcycle accident, and the crazy thing about this, the biggest headline, it's not, wow, I got so hurt, right? I broke like a gazillion bones. I felt like I had like 10 different things broken. I was all jacked up, couldn't walk, had to have surgery, was in the hospital and rehab for almost 2 weeks. I mean, ultimately, I was off of work for 7.5 months. That's how hurt I was. And I'm still not completely healed. It's not like I healed 100% and then went back to work. It's like, well, your insurance is out and you could probably do the job, so get back to work, which is life, and that sucks, but it is what it is. Shout out to Jacob for these awesome standing still mugs. But March 13th, the crash, the biggest thing that did for me, and this is what I would call an on-paper negative, in reality positive. And what I mean by that is that on paper you go, hey, man, you're going to break your shit off in a motorcycle accident. You're not going to see it coming. The person that's going to hit you is going to be very literally, what am I trying to say? They're going to be affected by this outcome very, very small. It's barely going to affect them, and yet for you, it's going to really affect you. Man, it's going to change your life, and it's extremely negative in a lot of different ways on paper. But the positives and the blessings that it's going to bring you, and we'll get into that, is far outweighs that by times 100. It's insane. Because remember, I'm coming into this moment a hollow shell of myself. That's where I'm coming into it. And yet, here I am, and I get in this huge accident. And if you guys have listened to that episode, you guys already know this. But the first thing, right, there's this huge accident. I still remember the sound. I remember the silence, and it's weird. It sounds like a movie, but there's this huge, I mean, the impact of me just slamming into the side of this car. I remember it. I was awake through the whole thing. And there's just kind of this, your ears stop working for a second. It's almost like a flash grenade in a movie or a video game. It's just, there's this ringing for a second, and there's no pain, and then it just kind of slowly sweeps in the intensity of the moment as I'm laying there in the street. All the pain, the reality of what's actually happening, of like, I just got in a huge, huge accident. I have no idea how hurt I am. All I know is that whatever gauge that I have of pain and kind of, you know, that gauge, that level of like, all right, how hurt I am is I'm at a new level, and I have no idea how to gauge it because it so far surpasses the many, many things that I've already hurt myself in my past. So I'm in new territory here. I have no idea how hurt I am. All I know is that I'm in the worst pain of my life by a lot, and I don't know. I mean, are my legs twisted in 3 different ways? I have no idea. All I know is that I'm in so much pain, and that my life just took a turn. We'll figure out to the severity, but I know for a fact it's taking a turn. Okay? But the first thing that went through my mind, and I'm not bullshitting you on this, is that I remember thinking like, okay, this is the sign, huh? This is the perspective that I needed. Wow, this is pretty gnarly. That if I didn't realize I was that depressed, right? I've been kind of talking, wanting a sign. We talked about convincing myself that I should be confident, shouldn't be depressed. I just need that perspective that I would be able to convince to myself would be a genuine thing, and then I would believe it. And this accident gave me all of that and more. I, to put it simply, loved who I was in that moment and for months to come. And I'm the type of guy that even just saying that makes me sound like it's so weird. I've learned I'm kind of a weird individual in the sense of like, I have way less issue coming on here and talking about me being depressed and dealing with the negatives in my life. And yet it's harder for me to say that, oh, I did this well. I just don't like to, it's hard for me to do that, right? I used to have a hard time receiving things, and it's just hard for me to assert that worth into the world. And for me to even just say like, I loved who I was in the sense of these people that were, from the first responders to the people in the hospital to my therapists, physical and occupational, and to family and friends. I just felt like the person that was there had no choice and no time to really react on who they were going to be. And so I got a real true shot of what my character was, and I loved that character. They brought me to the hospital, and I was making everybody laugh. I was just like, even though I was in so much pain, there was multiple times, and they're like, "You okay?" I was like, "Everything's great. Like, how's your day going?" And then they would take and they're like, "Your heart rate is like through the roof. Like, you got to be in so much pain." I was like, "Well, I don't want to complain." They're like, "You need to go sit down." Like, oh my gosh. And you said, "What? Never in pain?" Just because I just didn't want to be. I don't know. I didn't want to be the attention, and I made sure that it wasn't about me, while still getting the care that I needed. I met a lot of great individuals, both tending to me when I was in the hospital, when I was at rehab, when I was out of the hospital, and people were coming to my house. Or I just met so many great individuals. But ultimately, what I have written is that, I shielded from my own negativity is what it just shielded me. It was like a freshly waxed, detailed car. You spray it with water, you spray it with negativity, and it just beads off. It was like I just couldn't be negative. I was so positive, even though I had all the reason to be negative, dude. I was broken in 10 different ways. And trust me, don't get me wrong, like making doctor's appointments and dealing with insurance and blah, 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 blah. And of course, that fucking bitch that turned in front of me is like trying to say it's my fault, and we had to deal with all that. So I'm dealing with all kinds of very frustrating things. But and I had my frustrating days. But in the grand scheme of things, I just could not be negative. It just beaded right off of me. And this is coming from a guy that's always trying to convince himself, always trying to be on guard. And to refer back to that lesson learned, right? I thought about depression a lot of I would get depressed like in, this, first month and a half or with chapter 2, that hollow shell. I would get depressed and I go, okay, why am I depressed? Let's figure that out. And then let's just move past it. And what I wrote and what I said earlier about, kind of lessons learned in the sense of depression is not a broken bone. It is alcoholism. I'm realizing that for myself, and I think a lot of others, but I could only speak for myself, that for me, it is not hey, I'm depressed. Let's figure it out. Let's move past it. Now it's healed. I've listened to a lot of different people, individuals like Steve-O on his podcast where he's dealt with sobriety and stuff like that. And just people that I know that are alcoholics. I think it's a very interesting take in the sense they could be sober for years and years and years. And people go, wow, that's great. You're cured. And they go, I'm never cured. You're always thinking about it. You're always working at it. And that's kind of how I am with depression. Even when I'm on at my highest and I'm having my best days, it's still in my head. I'm still always aware. It's almost like you have a pet with a crazy exotic, you have a pet lion and you raised it since you were a cub and it's great. Everything's great. And it's never attacked you. And it's definitely a full size and you've had it for years and it's fantastic. And your best days are happening now. But you always have that but it could still get me. It's always in your head. You always have that respect for it. And you're always kind of on guard of will we enter in the cage this way? That's how I am with depression. I always, even on my best days, I'm still thinking about it and always concerned of not wanting that to slide back into to that kind of phase, to that mindset. I'm always making sure that I have opportune and genuine ammo to win the argument with myself that I should be confident, that life is really rad, and that I'm doing a good job, and to stay motivated. I'm always dealing with that. Like I said, it's not a broken arm. It's not okay, we'll figure out what's wrong, wear this for 3 months, and then you're healed. It's you're going to be working on this every day for the rest of your life. That way you don't take another drink. That way you don't have another depressive day. And I'm not saying that I can never have another bad day. It's not what I'm saying. But there's a level between a bad day and having low days and being genuinely depressed and feeling worthless or whatever kind of, depression can have different faces, I'm sure, for a lot of different individuals. But that's what, That's kind of what I was here. And then, I just loved myself, who I was after this accident. I loved who I was being, and I had so much to work for, and it was just so easy to convince myself. And I was just super blessed, even though I had to, like I said, I had to deal with all those frustrations of the accident and dealing with all the medical BS and blah, 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 and having pins in my arm and dealing with that, and they didn't want to pull them out because the insurance, blah, 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 and it was annoying, but whatever. Again, I don't know. I'm just so blessed. And it was, crazy part of my life. But keep the show moving. Chapter 4. This is about May to October. And the reason why I split this chapter and I named it The Opportunity of Time is because this is the part where I was off of work still, and I was still very hurt. But I was not, how am I putting it this? I was healed enough to where I can do most things in life, but I was not ready to go back to work. I was not physically capable of doing my job that I still had waiting for me, which was, again, a blessing. So I was not, I was in that kind of zone of like, I could drive. I would be able to, make plans and go do stuff. My energy level and kind of my endurance was still very low. It was still dog shit in the sense of like, I'd go and hang out with somebody for a couple hours or a few hours, and I had to go back and like take a nap. Like I couldn't just be on my feet all day, and I couldn't just like hang out. Like just that energy of like being social and like running errands and just doing stuff all day, that would just wipe me out. Like I had a nap every single day. Like my endurance for doing basic things was still very low, as well as the physical stuff, like my knees and my wrists. Like, I would go to like somebody's kid's birthday party or something like that, and I would hang out for a few hours, and I was like, I got to go home and put my feet up. And also just like, I'm tired. Like it just wore me out. But I had enough to where I could begin to kind of, do my life again without having to go to work. It was kind of a weird spot. And I'm going to spend some time on this zone because this was one of the biggest blessings I've had in my life, right? Because, sorry, it's very hot in here. I'm sweating. These headphones are killing me. But the reason why I want to spend a lot of time on this kind of region of my life is that I learned a lot from this opportunity. And I even have it written here that this is kind of the opportunity of time, right? It is the chance to a clean start. And what I mean by that is that here I am and I'm on this roll of feeling positive and blah, blah, blah. And now I'm getting into the zone where I can kind of live my life without having to have the job that takes all of my time. That, to be honest with you, really kind of, takes away a lot from my life, as you guys will hear and when I get to that chapter. But I wanted to take full advantage of the time that I had. I took time off right before the accident to try to learn and kind of figure myself out and get back to trying to love myself. And then I was forced into having even more time because of the accident. And I was loving myself. And so here I was with all this time. And I remember thinking in the moment, like, I need to take advantage of this. This is an absolute opportunity and a blessing that I have all this time to be able to work on myself and work on things without having the burden of having to go to a job. And boy, did it bring the blessings and the lessons. We'll get into it. First of all, it's very interesting in the sense of that I was extremely busy during that time. A lot of people, and it was at first when I was extremely hurt, right? For the first few months being in a wheelchair and things like that, that it was a lot of just, and I only had the energy level for this kind of stuff anyways, but a lot of just laying around and healing and, maybe stretching here and there and watching TV. I've seen like every freaking thing on YouTube. I've watched so much TV, but after that, when I kind of somewhat capable do stuff and have a life, I was extremely busy. And I remember one thing that jumped out at me is individuals that I know that really love their job and really kind of love what they do for a living. Those guys, I know an elevator mechanic, and he loves it, and makes a ton of cash doing it, and he's a great guy. And I fucking love the guy. He's my buddy's brother. And him and a lot of other individuals just like him, I remember they're like, man, you got to be going crazy. Like, you got nothing to do, right? And for me, for them, I would imagine it was like, man, their job, they love it, and it gives them so much purpose and all this stuff. And then that would be removed if they got hurt, and it's like, man, they just have nothing to fill that void. Where for me, the job seemed to be always getting in the way because, as I've talked about a million times on the show, being an electrician has done a lot for me. I get paid decently well, but at the same time, I just don't have any passion for it, right? And so I've said this before, and I've said it to my father. During the week or whenever I have to work, my day doesn't start until I get home from work. What does that mean? Let me unpack that really quick to give you guys some clarity. What that means is that I go, and I'm not saying I don't work hard, okay, if anybody's listening. I fucking work hard, and anybody that knows me knows that I work hard. I go to work, I work hard, but I don't really get anything out of it life-wise. I'm not like, man, I built some stuff, and I fucking feel valuable for it. I go to work, I get paid, and whenever I leave, I'm fucking out of there, and that's just how it is. Like, and I hate that. Because I'm the type of guy that wants to chase something. I want to be the guy that fucking keeps moving up the ladder and is motivated and it brings a lot of value to his life. I fucking hate that I don't feel like that at the job that pays me right now. But so here I am. Those guys are thinking, the people that have that with their job, which I'm super jealous of, they're looking at me like, man, you're not working. Like, man, you got nothing to do. Like, holy cow. How are you feeling out your day? You got to be going crazy. And in my mind, I was extremely busy. Like I said, it was like, oh my gosh, now I got all this time to actually do what I want with my life. After about 4 months of being hurt, I brought the podcast back. I was going crazy with that, doing all kinds of podcasting things. I've been back to work for a couple months, as we'll get into, but I was actually working out and doing more back then with a way more physically hurt body than I am now working, okay, which sucks and sounds wrong. But I was able to, hey, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go on a hike to start my day. So I had time and I had the freedom to figure out how I was going to plan my day. I love that. Sometimes I wanted to get a lot of work during the morning, and I could do that. And then I could just kind of chill at night because it, like I said, I didn't have the energy still. So it was like I had to really pick and choose on how I was going to spend my energy. Or if I really wanted to be creative, I could just kind of have a slow start to a morning, knowing that I was going to have a later day. Usually, like if it was a podcast recording day, I could have a slow morning, kind of not use my energy, but then really come on strong at the end of the day. And I would be super creative. I wasn't already burnt out and things like that. I was able to give back. I was able to help out my buddy's deal in La Puente, helping out, giving out food. I had all this time to just kind of help others. And also, I was really able to kindle past relationships and current relationships. But what I mean by that is that obviously when you get in a huge accident, a lot of people reach out and they want to make sure you're okay. And they want to make sure you're fine. And they also, hey, we can. And I had the freedom and the time to actually go and see all those different relationships and see those different individuals in my community and my friends and my family. And it was on the note of like, we're so glad to see you and we're so glad you're okay. And then I'm operating at the frequency of, I love myself too. And I'm so glad to see you. And I wish I can convince you that you're the same. So I got to see all these different individuals. And the tone of every conversation was just like, man, we're so happy to be here hanging out. That was just happening over and over and over again with individuals that I haven't seen in a couple of years. Everybody has those friends like, I got to hit that guy up, and then you never do. This gave us a reason, and that happened often. Like every week I had multiple, man, I'm going to go get lunch with this guy and catch up with this guy. And obviously, this isn't from a like, I got to tell my story and I got a pity party because everybody got to hear about how I got hurt. Obviously, I had to tell the story a million times of how I crashed and where I'm at with my recovery, but that was because they wanted to ask and they wanted to hear, and I could tell it was from a angle of care and self-care and care for me. So I would tell them that story, but it just and also made me realize just how many people care about me, which was really nice. But I I just remember that the point I'm trying to make is that I was so busy. The thing that's like supposed to be my life that I'm supposed to work on, being this job, has been taken away, and it immediately got filled up with all of the things that I wish I could do always. And that was a huge tell for me, right? That it's kind of in the way of what's actually important to me. I understand I need to make money. I understand, I'm not saying I went on vacations every week. That's not what I'm saying. But I had time to actually I had a sense of structure because I was going to physical and occupational therapy a minimum of 4 times a week. I had doctor's appointments all the time. So I had this structure with therapy and with doctor's appointments and with the podcast, to be honest with you. And then I had this freedom to also work on myself in the sense of I was able to go on hikes to try to work out my knees and work towards stuff. So I had these physical goals with my body of where I could work towards that. And I actually had the time and energy to do that. And then creatively, I wasn't always so burned out from going to this job. So the podcast was excelling. I loved who I was. And also, like I said, I got to kindle a lot of relationships, or kindle to, or whatever, how you want to say it. But I also, dude, we'll get into this. I was dating a lot. I had the time to date. And kind of the lessons that I learned from that, which I'll try to breeze over this because I talk about dating a lot. At least I did during that period. But there is a toxicity to those dating apps. And, well, okay. Let me put this first. This was an interesting moment because and I have this written down, even though I wasn't working, I had the weakest body. I received the most attention from the opposite sex that I've ever gotten. Kind of interesting in the sense of, if you want to talk about a guy, it's I'm at home on disability and I'm kind of this frail guy right now. And yet I was getting the most amount of dates that I've ever got in my life, by a lot. In the few months, I went on between 25 to 30 dates, somewhere in there. And that was a very interesting tell for me in a lot of different ways. For one, it showed me that I'm the best version of myself when I love who I am. Okay, and that's very contagious. That alone is what kept getting me dates. I can tell you that right now. And it really taught me a lesson because it showed me the value of loving who I am and being confident and everything like that. But, and this is kind of a weird slight, in the sense of when I think about having options, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. And I'll tell you why. And this could be options in many different areas of your life, but specifically in dating, here I am going on 2 to 3 dates a week, right? There was a couple that I would go on multiple dates with, but for the most part, they were one and done. And they were pretty much all just coffee dates. But here I am going on 2 to 3 dates a week, and it's just all through the apps, right? Just through Hinge mostly and a little bit through Bumble. And it got to the point where the positive that it brought with having the options, there's kind of a fruit aspect to it where it gets really ripe, where it's not good to have, 0 options, but you have options, so you can kind of, blah, 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 blah. It's good to have options. But if you have too many options, I realized towards the end the toxicity of those apps when you do have options, because even if you go on a date, they could be a great person and things could be great, but you have this mentality of well, the next one's coming. I got another date in 2 days. And so you just end up kind of not being too picky, I guess, but you devalue people that don't need to be devalued because you have so many options, right? And it kind of, I remember saying this, I was I feel like a hot chick a little bit, that just always has options, because it was interesting. I never had that in my life, that feeling. But like I said, I was going on 2 to 3 dates a week, and I'm not saying they were all 10s and I'm this hottest guy ever, but they were all, I was getting dates, and most of them went on another date. I learned that people are fantastic. They can be amazing, but it doesn't mean that I should or have to want to date them. I went on a lot of dates. We talked for 2 hours, and I was that's really great, and I think you're a great person, and I hope the best for you. I have no interest in dating you, but you're a fantastic person. I had a lot of those. I had a lot were just like not fun, especially towards the end. If they didn't bring the best of their ability, I was like, I could tell you about me, but I've already talked and told these stories on many, podcasts. I've already talked to it on the last date that I had 2 days ago and the one before that. So I can tell you about me and I can tell you stories. And it was almost a challenge to sound interesting, because if it's not exciting to me, of me telling my story about myself, I'm not going to tell it very well, which means I'm not going to come off well. So it was boring for me. So they really had to bring their game. Otherwise, I was just so bored, which, whatever. But ultimately, yeah, I learned a lot from dating. I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot what I don't want to date from. Okay. So I spent a lot of time on that chapter because I felt like I really took full advantage, and I had my eyes completely open during that time of like, you have the time here to do what you want, clean slate, the opportunity of time. Make sure you make the most out of it. And I felt like I did, and I learned a lot. And it leads me up perfectly into this next chapter. Chapter 5 started October, I think, 18th. And it's titled simply Back to Work. And what I mean by that is that's when I went back to work, as you guys could hear or assume. And while I immediately had a different appreciation and I was aware of the blessing to simply have a career, right? Because there was a lot of in question of like, am I physically going to be able to do this job it's kind of a physical job? Do I even have a career anymore? So there was kind of some question in that. I'm glad to have answered that I do, and I still can perform the work. I'm super blessed, and I'm aware that that is a great thing. However, the stark blatancy of what it doesn't add to my life as well as what it takes away was very, very clear. Let me unpack that. As I went back to work, that was obviously closing a chapter of having all the time to do and kind of not only explore my own self and mental health, but also just things that I really wanted to chase and really, I had the time to be like, let's explore that avenue and see if that adds value to my life. And there was a lot of things that did. And I also confirmed that a lot of things weren't. And so coming back to this job, here I am. I'm like, man, I'm so blessed to still have a career, and I still am. But it was right back to the grind, pretty much. I'm not saying I immediately got depressed again, but I immediately realized that kind of what I said at the beginning with lessons learned. I'm trying to choose my words wisely here, as you guys can probably tell. But what I originally said was what you do for a living should add a sense of value to your life. And ultimately, I realized very blatantly that it doesn't add to my life. And like I'll repeat like what I already said, the stark blatancy of what it doesn't add to my life as well as what it takes away. It's that blatant. And it sucks to say that. And the biggest thing really is that even though I get paid pretty well, I have this goal that I set of like, I'm going to buy a house in 2022. And as I kept doing more homework and I met with a realtor, and as I just kept getting further down the process of like, let's actually make this happen. This goal is on my list, and I'm destined and I'm determined to make it happen and be a success. Even though it's like, wow, you make this money or whatever, it is not enough to obtain a goal that I would realistically want. I mean, the houses I can afford is like a joke. I'm not even excited about it. So it's like, I'm going to be shackled to this job. And it's like, well, you buy this shitty fucking tiny 1,000 square foot house on a dirt lot in Chino or in Ontario. It's like, aren't you excited about your first house? It's like, no, this is a shack. This isn't, I'm talking less than 1,200 square. Like, this is pathetic, right? This is what $600,000 gets you as a single guy. And so for the longest time, it was like, well, that's what I do to get paid. And it's not even making me enough money to really satisfy that. So it's not making me enough to where it's satisfying. And it's taking away a lot of the things that I really found value in, that I not only kind of knew, but also was able to discover when I had the time from being hurt and being off of work, like going and being able to volunteer my time and help out others. Having the time and the energy to actually stretch every day and work out often and actually have fitness goals, as well as do the podcast, as well as do this, as well as do that. It takes all of that away, and is also as well as take all of my energy in the most, when I need it the most, basically. And I guess ultimately that's what leads me into chapter 6, finishing out the year, and I quoted it, now what? And I just have moving to Montana. I've made the decision that I'm moving out of California. What that does for the podcast, I don't know, but I'm moving to Montana. Not right this second, but I am going to be moving out of Montana because I got to get out of here and I got to change my life around. I understand that depression is not just a broken bone. It is a disease that I live with, and I'm not going to bang my head against the wall and for years and years and years try to figure out a solution to convince myself that this is the way to go about it, where I have no energy to do what I want creatively, and yet I would have to go to a job in a setting in LA. I mean, they tell me, like, when this job's done, you're going to go over here. And I go, oh, God, I want nothing to do with that. I want nothing to do with that job. But that's what's going to pay me. And then you go, okay, well, I'm going to buy a house, and it's going to be way further from, the commute's going to be way worse, and the house is going to be a shithole, and you're going to be working every single day. You have to go to that job. Otherwise, you're going to not be able to make that mortgage payment. What am I doing here? I'm moving out of California. You heard it here. But I want to go through these lessons learned before we wrap and touch back on that again. Community that adds or multiplies is priceless. That is straight out of my guy, Big John. You got to have people that surround you that add or multiply, because if they're not, what are they doing? They're subtracting and dividing. Community that adds or multiplies. I'm talking about all those friendships, all that family that I was able to kindle and kindle those relationships and meet with those individuals when I was hurt. All those people that reached out to me, and I just, man, the people that, you're the average of the 5 people you hang around most, and the people that I hang around the most, I'm super thrilled to see and know that I'm the average of those gentlemen and those individuals. What you do for a living should add a sense of value to your life. Having the ability to be off of work for 7.5 months and actually have the time to explore my own mental health and to explore what actually adds value to me has made me clearly realize that what I do for work and the impact it has on my life does nothing but take away from my mental health and take away from the person that I would like to be and who I want to continue to be, I should say. Number 3, my resilience to and ability to rid of negativity has long time been a weakness. It is now a strength. I totally agree with that. I used to be anything and everything would happen to me, and then it would just destroy me. And I'm not saying I haven't had bad days, but I've had a lot of things happen this year, right? A lot of things that I didn't talk about, but you guys have probably heard on this podcast. Obviously, the accident. I've had to deal with all the bullshit from the injury, not only physically, but just dealing with the medical and the frustrations with that. I've had my truck stolen. The dentist has been a huge pain in the ass. I don't know. The list goes on and on. It's hard to remember the stories without actually going back and listening, but I've had quite the year. And I'm excited to know that I do find it as a strength. I mean, I really do. To know that I can get very upset, but at the same time I realize and I just go, man, I can't wait to laugh at this, and I can't wait to find the perspective that I can genuinely convince myself that this is going to not only make a great story and podcast material, but it's also going to be just a learning experience. That is clearly, and I would argue this to the end of my days, that is a strength of mine now. And the last one, which we've already repeated multiple times, but depression is not a broken bone. It is alcoholism. I agree with that completely. And I will leave you guys with this. Oftentimes, you guys see me brand my Instagram posts. You'll see me brand it sometimes in the description of the episodes. You guys will see me shout it out on this podcast, as I will do now. But sometimes it is not branding, or I should say often or most times it is not branding. It is simply an individual trying to convince himself that life is truly rad. And life is really rad, man. It really is. And I'll leave you guys with that. Take care, everybody. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to check out the Standing Still podcast, both here on YouTube and wherever else you listen to podcasts.